Oh boy, do we have a lot to unpack in this one. If you're an empath and have helped the wrong person, the wrong people, this true crime case is going to dive us into a lot of why we do that, why we help the wrong people, what attracts us to this, what type of manipulation, what's happening within us that we need to truly examine and look at. Hey there, welcome back to Heart of the Case, where true crime meets a therapist's curiosity. My name is Lauren. I am your clinical therapist. Today we're threading the needle between prison bars and pillow talk with the Dannemora prison escape. Yes, that one. We're not one, but two. Two inmates slipped out of the Clinton Correctional Facility in 2015. This was recreated several times. It was on Showtime. That's what led me into it. Benicio del Toro made me do this. He's dynamic, but we'll talk about Richard Matt, which is the person that he played, all based off of a true story. So we're breaking this down personality style from a mental health lens. Let's dive into this wild tale.
Did you have sex with these two inmates? No, I didn't do anything wrong.
Here we have these three people: Richard Matt, grown man with major charm and manipulator energy. His childhood was tragic. We'll dive into that in a little bit. But David Sweat was quieter but calculated. His trauma showed up as an emotional shutdown, and he was really serving life without parole for killing a sheriff's deputy. And then there's Tilly. She's a wife, she's a mom, she's the prison worker. She works as the seamstress supervisor. She was bored though, and emotionally hungry and just wanting to feel special, constantly wanting to feel special. She worked in the tailor shop and she started getting way too cozy with the inmates. She really wanted to feel wanted, which we've all been there. Only in this, it was like the perfect storm of her meeting these two, especially Matt, because he knew exactly how to work upon that emotional want. In early 2015, Tilly is working in this tailor shop and she begins bringing books and snacks and starts having very flirtatious conversations with Sweat. And it starts crossing that line into a sexual relationship. Tilly is just, she hasn't been this happy in years, and years. And it shows to everyone in this tailor shop. It has to show. I have worked within a corrections facility and people just become really in tune to body language, any type of flirtation. It's just like highlighted, especially in a men's male prison unit. So this is where Matt starts getting into his mind, like, I can use this for my own benefit. So he begins plotting and he begins drawing Tilly pictures and things like that. And so they start showering her, love bombing, if you will, Tilly with so much attention. And they begin to convince Tilly to start smuggling in tools. At first, Matt tells her that the tools are going to be used to create even better paintings. Tilly uses frozen hamburger meat and hides a hacksaw within this hamburger meat. And I don't know. I mean, I am assuming that Tilly was just completely in over her head with these manipulation tactics. And we'll dive into where Tilly's headspace might have been, especially because in Heart of the Case, I really like to dive into the why and how. Like, how did this happen? And around the summer months of 2015, Sweat and Matt start spending time cutting through the walls. Right. So this is happening, entering into the summer, and they start crawling through and mapping out really in a Shawskank level route here. So every night they put cardboard in their beds and they disappear behind the walls. And it's really like becomes their part-time job. Like they're not getting any sleep. And it's important to say that it's summertime because they're actually thinking it's going to take years, like 5 years or so, to break through a brick wall that they finally get to. And this is like layers and layers deep. And then as it turns into June of that summer, 2015, the one of the steam pipes that is used to heat this correctional facility turns off because it's summer and it's no longer needed. So then they realize, we can just cut through this pipe and then exit out through this tunnel. This timeline of theirs from 5 years gets cut down to like a few months. So then they start kind of roping Tilly into the plan, and she's supposed to, they start convincing her to pick them up outside the prison with a getaway car, and they are going to take off and live a beautiful life in Mexico. Except when the day comes, and the day being June 6th of 2015, Tilly gets a change of heart. Sweat and Matt escape through the wall, down the pipes, and into the steam tunnel system. They're thinking they're home free. They pop out of the manhole outside of the prison that they have mapped out. And when they get there, Tilly's not to be found. Tilly doesn't show. Tilly ended up having a panic attack and ended up in the hospital that night. She tries to leave the hospital, begging the doctors to let her go. But of course, I mean, she's already admitted into the ER. And then the manhunt ensues. I remember hearing this on TV back in 2015. This was very scary. For 20 days, the entire state of New York is on edge. This is pretty much the whole month of June. Schools closed down. Helicopters are everywhere. Cops are searching the forest. They're searching cabins. Sweat is being as careful as he possibly can, while Matt is just, he's freaking out. He's breaking into cabins. He's drinking a whole lot. He's leaving behind DNA everywhere. This is where I feel like it's a little bit of self-sabotage, which I want to get into as well. Not only how Tilly's body literally sabotaged her whole fantasy, but how Matt is also sabotaging and eventually Sweat as well. Tilly actually didn't disclose too much upon the whole escape and everything happening, but I think over time she just unraveled. She kept going back to the police, sharing different details. I think really her guilt was getting to her when ultimately the police, after everything that she was disclosing, had to put her under arrest, and she pleaded guilty and got 2 to 7 years. Ultimately, on June 26th of 2015, Matt is found, and it's not a pretty story. Police track him down in the woods, and he has a shotgun. It's shoot to kill, and they do that. They do just that. They do what they have to do because this is a very cold criminal that is literally out on the run. So that's the end of the road for Richard Matt. It's very tragic because beneath all of that danger is a person, right? There's a man who never really got any love, any connection, and he had a family and he had a daughter. His daughter has written her own book about it and has honestly been very open about her own relationship with Matt being her father and how it wasn't the best of childhoods for her as well, which we can assume because unless you are actively trying to break childhood wounds and childhood trauma, we recreate it a lot of times without wanting to. Later on, a few days later, June 28th of 2015, Sweat is also meeting his end of his run. 2 days later, Sweat is found running through a field. He basically, I think in his mind, feels like he's home free, really nearing the Canadian border at this point, and a trooper shoots and captures him. So Sweat doesn't die, he survives, and he is now sent to and in a different maximum security prison, 24-hour surveillance. He is in complete solitary confinement. And then for Tilly, she served the 4 years, and in 2020, she was released on parole, and she really just stayed under supervision until 2022. And since then, silence. No interviews, no public appearances, just vanished back into, I guess, her real life. And honestly, I kind of get it. I think that she made huge, destructive, delusional choices that were now on display for everyone to see. And then really at the core is a woman who was lonely. She was emotionally starved, and she was made to feel like she mattered more than she did for these two inmates. And this was possibly for the first time that she ever felt this in who knows how long. And that doesn't excuse what she did, but it truly just, it explains it. So how did we get here, right? And I really want to break down each character a little bit more. Richard Matt. Early in his childhood was raised in a very unstable environment. Matt's childhood was characterized by abuse, neglect, and extremely poor supervision. He was in juvenile detention by the age of 13 and was reportedly abusing alcohol by the age of 9. Richard Matt is someone that I would have come across as a social worker in my early years. About 3 to 4 years into my career as a social worker, where I got my clinical chops, was within a correctional facility, complete lockdown for juvenile delinquents, males between the ages of 13 to 18. At 18, they aged out. My youngest client was 13, and I worked on a substance abuse unit where these young people were diagnosed with substance abuse disorder at this very, very young age. It was not uncommon to hear stories about them experimenting with substances, drinking at by third, fourth grade. Richard Matt truly saw the world from a whole different skew. Not all, but when someone's childhood, when their formative years, where trust and love, unconditional love, is supposed to be shown to you so that you can trust the world and the people in it, when you don't have that, when it's quite the opposite, when there's a lot of neglect and abuse. He was in and out of the foster care system as well. And there's just this trauma that lingers there. You begin to distrust the world and everything in it. A lot of what I did as a social worker and counselor on the unit was to build trust, build empathy within children, teens that never had that I was like speaking a foreign language to them. I truly feel like I was able to truly build that within many of the children and teens that were placed there. Not all, but many of them. And that's why early intervention is so, so important. Richard Matt's criminal file escalated very quickly from burglary and assault to killing and dismembering a man in Mexico before his US convictions. He exhibits classic signs of antisocial personality disorder, and I'm going to dive deeper into what this means because it's not what you think it means, but the antidote, the solution to combat antisocial personality disorder, if I would have had Richard Matt as a client early on in his years, would have been to build empathy and trust. Someone with antisocial personality traits really has a disregard for others' safety, impulsivity, and deceitfulness, and a lot of aggression. For younger kids, if he showed these traits earlier on, he wouldn't have been diagnosed antisocial, but he would have been diagnosed with a conduct disorder, what we call CD. Richard Matt also shows a lot of malignant narcissism. He was very charming, very manipulative. These are traits that make someone charismatic. It makes someone almost like a magnet, especially to another that doesn't inherently feel these things. And I think Tilly and also the other inmate Sweat had this kind of almost like a uncertainty to them. So I truly think that's what helped them gravitate towards Richard Matt and really be manipulated by him because he just exuded self-confidence. I know when I'm watching things along with my friends, my husband, they ask me, what diagnosis would that be? And Tilly definitely presents with what I'd call histrionic personality disorder. She did appear to crave attention and validation, especially from the two escapees, which mindset we're going to unpack as well, especially Richard Matt. And someone like Richard Matt can almost sense and spot vulnerabilities in people. And if you are a clinical social worker or a therapist, kind of thinking about this, Richard Matt is really like a client that you know is giving you half the story. If you've ever had that feeling, I mean, you don't even have to be a therapist to have this feeling, even when you're dating or when you are talking to someone at work, maybe a friend. You know, sometimes when people are telling you half the story and they have like a half smile on their face the whole time while doing it. And you have to be very careful here because they are reading your social cues at all times. And by they, I'm talking about someone with antisocial personality traits, someone with narcissism. They know exactly what they're doing. They're buttering you up. And like I said, you don't have to be a therapist to feel this. Honestly, we are all very vulnerable to anyone with these personality traits. But if you are a therapist listening to this and you have a favorite, right, like your favorite client, beware because oftentimes you may be having the wool pulled over your eyes for just a little bit because you honestly don't realize that you're being played. On the opposite end, though, if you do have a strong radar for narcissism, if you've ever been a victim of a narcissist, then you have a very strong cue to this and it actually puts you off. It actually makes you feel sick to your stomach when you are coming up across this. So I think with people that have narcissistic personality traits, antisocial personality disorder, you either love them and you're falling for every word or you despise them. You feel the ick like every time you're with them. And there are clients that do that as well. So tune into your instinct. Tilly had no chance. People with these traits can definitely F up your whole life. And I do want to get into Tilly Mitchell's life as well. Tilly is the person I think gets all the heat in this case sometimes because we can understand why prisoners would want to escape prison. It's hard to understand why a person would fall for their manipulation. And I don't want to paint her as a dumb or desperate person because once we do that, we truly lose sight of what we can learn from this because there's always a lesson to be learned. And I don't want to cast Tilly off as dumb. It stops us from learning what we need to learn. And honestly, when we are pointing the finger or looking at someone in judgment, there's things within ourselves that we have to get curious about as well, because they honestly might be pointing out something within us that we don't want to see. And I think Tilly definitely does that for most people. Most women don't want to feel like we would be deceived or dumb in that kind of way. If you haven't watched the show yet, you got to picture a woman that's stuck in a very dull routine. And we've all been there, right? It's just like stuck in a dull routine. So whenever we get a shot of dopamine, it's a shock to the system for sure. Clinically, I believe Tilly was probably dealing with a lot of unresolved trauma, possibly low self-worth. It's hard to tell with someone with histrionic personality traits because they seem to kind of be a little boastful, think the most about themselves, and it's kind of a cover up, very similar to narcissistic personality disorder. However, there's so much emotional need that is going unfilled. And there is definitely a codependent streak within Tilly, which I can identify with myself. Codependency is nothing that's diagnosable, but let me give you a breakdown of what codependency is. So, codependency is really when you're dating or in a relationship with someone and your entire mood truly depends on their mood. If they're happy, you're good, you're smooth sailing. But if they're distant, if they're moody, if they're off in any way, you begin spiraling, trying to fix it, trying to make them feel better, trying to be enough because you don't feel like enough. So you begin abandoning your own needs. You begin over functioning in the relationship, doing too much, apologizing for the things that truly aren't your fault at all. And these are things that are out of your control, and you find yourself apologizing for them. Also, you start getting downloads about your own worth from how much they need you. I want to put that need in quotations because no one truly needs you. You need you, and that's it. No, I think there's this very common misperception about relationships that like one person is going to fulfill the other person, and that is simply not true. You both want to come happy and well adjusted, and then you both can lift each other up together, but no one should need the other. We've all heard about emotional support animals, things like that. Well, basically, you become an emotional support human to someone, and that someone might not even be meeting your own needs. And you start thinking that if you can just be better in any way possible, they'll love you more. And spoiler alert, they won't. not in a healthy way, at least. To dive deeper into who Tilly was, she was actually born Joyce Mitchell. That was her name. She was named after her mother, and she didn't like going by the name Joyce at all. She preferred Tilly. She was a middle-aged prison employee working in the tailor shop. She grew up in a very small town. Not too much is publicly known about her trauma, which makes it a little bit hard. But in her interviews, it does suggest that she had a pretty mundane, emotionally unsatisfying life. And I bring this up because sometimes, yeah, we deal with mundane tasks. I don't know if it was truly the mundane that drove Tilly to do this. She was reportedly bored and unhappy in her marriage, and she had had a history of very low self-worth. She was very vulnerable. When you're unsatisfied in life, unhappy about what you're doing with your life or the trajectory of it, you're hitting middle age, which I'm getting there myself, you start to evaluate these things. And if you couple that with low self-worth, wherever that may stem from, it just becomes this ugly mix that makes you very vulnerable to predators like Richard Matt. Tilly admitted to feeling special when the inmates paid attention to her, which who wouldn't? If you are feeling stuck, if you even your own personality is telling you you could do better, you're worth more, where's the excitement? And then you have two inmates showing you attention, showering you with gifts. Now let's talk about Richard Matt. Richard Matt, played by Benicio del Toro in the show called Escape from Dannemora. He is, and you can see why they would cast Benicio del Toro. I'm sorry, just a little celebrity crush of mine. Richard Matt was very charming, artistic, and wildly manipulative. So we talked about histrionic personality traits. If narcissism had a criminal older cousin, it would be Richard Matt. Matt painted portraits. He flattered staff, he played mind games constantly, and he had zero problem hurting others when it served his own purpose. Those are traits of narcissism. And with Richard Matt, it honestly goes beyond narcissism. He's a person I would diagnose as antisocial personality disorder, not to be confused with someone that doesn't know how to socialize. People use that, oh, you're so antisocial, thinking that it means you don't know how to socialize. It's quite the opposite. Someone with antisocial personality disorder or traits of an antisocial personality are very, very socially skilled. They are manipulative, they're very deceitful, and they lack remorse while they're doing it all. So a typical person could be manipulative, right? They could be deceitful, but at some point there's going to be some type of remorse, some type of guilt that happens, not with a person that's diagnosed with anti-personality disorder, not at all. And Richard Matt definitely had this. He wasn't just cold, he was very strategic about every move he made within this prison. And technically, you have to be when you're in prison. People with antisocial personality disorder can be very charming when it suits them. And Matt absolutely used his charisma as a weapon. I realize in certain situations, prison, in business, this personality trait serves you very, very well. There doesn't seem to be a big difference a lot of times between the personality and choices that someone in prison would make versus someone that is in politics or in business. But keeping it to Richard Matt, he is classic. You see Richard Matt bonding with guards and others over oil paints. He paints a lot of political figures, Hillary Clinton. There is an episode in the Netflix slash Showtime series that is, I think it's episode probably 6. I want to say 6 or 7. It's closer to the end. And it really dives into what exactly each of these characters, I call them characters because, oh my God, they are characters, but I forget they are real people. What each of these people went through in their lifetime. So they show you a little bit about Richard Matt. And I mean, it's really, especially for me, It's really easy to kind of get pulled into Benicio del Toro's character or Richard Matt because he is an artist. He is a dreamer. A lot of his mindset, which we'll dive into in a little bit, is all about manifestation. And he even talks about the secret and he connects with other prisoners and prison guards and workers there over oil paints and other like fake emotional connections as part of his thing. He just weaponizes his charisma, honestly and truly. And then when you see that he's actually in there for such a brutal murder, it's overwhelming. That episode alone, good to watch. I honestly wish Ben Stiller put it a little bit more in the beginning, but I know why he did this. I think it's a lot so that you can identify with each character, especially Tilly and the huge mistake that she made. So I get that. Awesome directing, but I really wish I would have watched that episode sooner because you truly see just the cold heartlessness of these people. And I still haven't gotten into the second prisoner, and that is David Sweat. He is the quieter of the two, very methodical and seemingly driven by a need to prove something. He wasn't the ringleader at all, but he was the engineer of the whole escape route. And he didn't just want out, he wanted perfection. There's an element of control and precision here that gives us insight into a need for mastery, a need for perhaps redemption. People with traits, and this sounds a lot like compulsive. It's not obsessive compulsive disorder like OCD, but it has the personality traits. People with these traits often struggle with flexibility and emotional expression, but they excel in structured chaos, which prison, ironically, can be. So Richard Matt and David Sweat connect. And here's the kicker. None of this happens without power dynamics and desperation. Let's go back to Tilly for a moment. If we're to learn anything from Tilly, we just really need to reflect on meeting our own needs and trying our best to combat codependency. And I broke down a lot about what codependency is and was, but I didn't share that I think it is a way of sabotaging ourselves. And so I'm going to share 5 ways we really imprison ourselves. I think that's part of why this story is something that I found so intriguing is that I have felt a little helpless lately. The world has made a lot of us feel like that. The political climate, the access to social media, all of it. So the first prison is of approval seeking. Tilly Mitchell is a case study in this. Tilly was desperate for validation. Many of us have been there. Many of us want the likes. We want those metrics, those vanity metrics on social media. We're craving that attention, whether we admit to it or not. Now, Tilly craved attention from the inmates and even interpreting manipulation as affection, which we often do ourselves, right? When we base our worth on other people's approval, other people's likes, we become emotionally incarcerated. We start imprisoning ourselves. We begin to be unable to move freely within our own identity and truly want what we want and go for what we want. The second prison that we have is that confusion. Richard Matt's charm was super disarming. He made people, not just Tilly either. There is many officers that were doing a lot of favors and they didn't think they were doing anything wrong, but they were quick to point the finger at Tilly. But in all honesty, they were also sneaking in contraband to Richard Matt. He made people feel seen. The guards, the inmates, and especially Tilly, of course, but the likability masked something deeply dangerous. How many of us have truly ignored red flags because someone was magnetic, because they reflected to us something we wanted to be? There is a whole episode on this, being manipulated by someone, toxic relationships. And I had a guest, a clinician herself, that truly opens up about being in this struggle and ignoring red flags and diving into a relationship with someone with narcissistic personality traits and how to escape those claws, how to stop ignoring red flags and start putting yourself first. It is a must listen to if you are feeling this type of confusion at all, because this is trauma bonding. If you have ever been through trauma bonding or fear that you might be in a trauma bond, it's very confusing. And we really break that down in episode, I forgot which episode. I'm going to check real quick. It's episode 10, Surviving Toxic Relationships, a whole guide to love bombing, trauma bonds, and breaking free. The next prison of the mind is routine and resentment. I mentioned that Tilly was working a monotonous job in a very small town and she was forced to deal with the mundane. But when fantasy enters the chat, she traded her whole reality for a story where she was needed, where she was admired, where she was the main character. We might want that for ourselves. Sometimes it's the routines that keep us safe, people. Feeling trapped in routines that no longer serve us, yet not knowing how to break free in a healthy way. Be careful what you wish for, because sometimes the mundane is the safety that we need to be able to focus on ourselves. And it's not that you have to stay trapped, it's that you need to find healthy escapes, because anything that sounds too good to be true oftentimes is too good to be true. Two more prisons that I want to break down that we have within our mind. One is survival mode. Richard Matt grew up with danger as his default. And for him, control and dominance, they were survival tools. Some of us operate from survival mode long after the threat is gone, and we stay hyper vigilant, and we stay controlling, and we stay reactive, and we stay hardened, thinking that we need those things to remain alive when we don't. So we really need to reflect on what our default is. And if we want to level up and go into our soft girl era, soft era, we really need to work on that unhealed trauma so we're not defaulting back and manipulating a truly soft life for ourselves. The last prison that I want to just unpack really quick that we can relate to is that prison of not being enough. Both Tilly and Matt were driven by the need for more, to be more, to want more love, more power, more freedom. That hunger can sometimes lead us into very dangerous places if we don't deal with it honestly, if we are not getting to the root of what we need. When nothing feels like enough, when a job doesn't feel satisfying enough, when our relationship doesn't feel like enough, when our achievements after achievements are not filling us up, we're often running from a wound, or we're running to fill a gap. We're not running towards any goal at all, but we're hiding. Sometimes underneath all this is a chronic shame. There's abandonment wounds. There's internalized unworthiness that we're sitting on where, yeah, there's not going to be enough to fill that void unless we work and start breaking those unresolved traumas that sometimes aren't even our own. They're just from our past. I feel like I'm already getting into a heart of the case lifestyle episode here. And a lot of times these cases dive me into those things. We can't talk about Tilly, Richard Matt, or David Sweat without talking about one of the most universal prisons of all, which is self-sabotage. Tilly didn't just risk her job. She didn't just cross a line. She lit the line on fire and was forced to deal with the repercussions. And why? Because when you don't believe you're worthy of peace and safety or love, in a healthy way of routine, you will subconsciously burn everything down that makes you feel safe and call it passion or call it escape or call it excitement. Self-sabotage says, let me ruin this before something else does. Self-sabotage says, I'm not good enough for a stable life anyway. I deserve this. Chaos feels more familiar than peace. And if this sounds familiar, you're not alone. In fact, next week, I do want to dive into this. We're going to go way deeper into this. We're dedicating an entire episode into self-sabotage, why you keep escaping the life you say that you want. If you're feeling uncertain, confused, you may be just sabotaging yourself. We'll look into how trauma, attachment wounds, and distorted self concepts quietly keep people locked in mental loops, even without a prison wall in sight. So if you've ever ghosted a good thing, pushed away a healthy relationship, or felt more alive in dysfunction rather than in peace, that episode's going to be for you. And I hope you enjoyed this episode as well. Told you we would unpack manipulation to mental health, and that was the escape from Dannemora. If this episode hit a nerve, served you, or called you out maybe in a way that you needed to hear, please share it with someone who needs to also hear this. And don't forget to rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, review or comment on Spotify and YouTube. I am on all platforms with this little podcast, Heart of the Case, and this helps. These ratings and reviews helps me to get in front of even more listeners. Till next time, take care of your mind and stay safe.